Okay, so hello everyone. I am Yorgos Muftoglu and I would like to welcome you in today's session, Module 4, Copyright and Art, powered by Open Media Group in Croatia, and also the project PAL Connect as part of the project's Open Art Studios. Today's trainer and presenter will be Mrs. Kristina Delfin Kanceljak, who is a law attorney in Zagreb and whose area of professional activity is mostly on intellectual property rights, culture, and media. Now, before moving on, I would like to provide you with some information about Project PAL Connect. The Project PAL Connect is engaging cultural, artistic, and research organizations to stimulate European awareness and empower people of current and future generations to respect the inclusion and the diversity and to be successful innovators in their local environments. The aim of the project is to support artists from social inclusion groups to present and promote their artworks in post-COVID-19 circumstances and to inspire their cooperation within the European countries. Now, the aim of today's session is to introduce the participants, you, to the term of copyright and the protection of your rights over your artworks. Issues that will be addressed are how to protect intellectual property, what is copyright, how to deal with unauthorized use of your artworks in real and digital work, and how to make sure that you do not breach others' copyrights. Now, before moving on, I would like to present you some general rules. First and foremost, as you've been already informed during your registration, and you agreed upon the GDPR, in accordance with the GDPR and due to the project's requirements, we inform you that the current trainings shall be recorded. Therefore, if you don't wish to be recorded and appear in the recorded version, you might as well turn off your cameras, and that also applies to some screenshots that we'll have to take later during the webinar for promotional purposes. Also, an attendance list will be shared to you via the chat section to be sent by all participants because we need to keep record of the participation. And also, by the end of today's session, before closing the meeting, we'll share with you again through the chat section an evaluation form. And we would ask you if you could be so kind as to fill it in because it is really important for the project's requirements again. So before moving on, I will now share with you the attendance list for the session. Let's just accept some participants. Okay. So I will now paste in the chat section the attendance list. Okay. So, moving on, this is the attendance list I just shared with you in the chat section, and this is the evaluation form you will be asked to fill out by the end of the session. Now, some rules of communication for this session. You can ask questions during the session's implementation. In case of such questions, please first raise your hand and then Mrs. Christina will give you permission to speak and you can unmute yourselves and ask your question. Therefore, the microphone should be muted during the whole session. The meeting, as you've already been informed, is being recorded and you can see an automatic message appearing on the top of your screen. We are going, as I said before, to ask you to open your cameras when we're taking the screenshots. And please, I already see that you have started filling out the attendance list. Please write your names of organizations to appear correctly. Now, if you do not in order to sign the attendance list, you can copy and paste or drag and drop your signatures if you have them on a picture format. If you don't, just write your names and in the signature section as well. It works for us. And also, if you don't have by any reason access to the attendance list right now, an email will be sent to you tomorrow, again with the link of the attendance list and the evaluation form, so in order to fill them out if you are not able today. Now, before giving the floor to Mrs. Christina, this is today's agenda. We're already done with the registration, the welcome in today's session, and the main part of today's session will follow about copyright, about owners, categories of rights, protection, usage of others' rights, limitation of rights, public domain, etc. And in the last 5 minutes before closing the meeting, we'll have the closing remarks, and you are to be asked to fill out the evaluation form. So, thank you again for joining in today. That was all from me. And without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Mrs. Christina in order to present herself and start today's session. Christina, I just shared your PowerPoint and you can also take control of it. So thank you all.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Hello to everyone. It's not usual that I'm doing this kind of presentation online because normally I always like to have some kind of interactivity with participants and listeners. So I encourage you to either raise your hands during my presentation if everything is unclear or needs additional information on some subject, or additionally, you can also write your questions in chat feature. We will try to follow and then give you the answers whenever it is appropriate or possible. So just feel free to drop in whenever you feel to. I will try not to be boring. I will try to present you an overview of the copyright system and make you much more clear some things that you probably have heard of, but didn't know what it is, what to do with something, how should you treat something, and so on. Let's go now. When we talk about copyrights, we must say and emphasize that it is part of one broader legal field, which is called intellectual property. Intellectual property consists of copyright and industrial property. When we speak about industrial property, this is trademarks, meaning logos, industrial design, patents, know-how. Copyright is other part of intellectual property, which will be described in today's webinar. And because all of you are creators that are basically connected with copyright issues much more than industrial property issues, we will speak about copyright. Of course, there are certain things in industrial property part of intellectual property law that can be interesting to you, especially branding for designers. But in that part, you can also cover your work with the copyright rules. So, what is the copyright? The copyright is right of the author of the work, but it is also the right of the holders of related neighboring rights of the work, to the work. We will later speak about neighboring rights, but you have to know that when somebody is mentioning copyright, that person doesn't always have to think only to the author, but also to the owners of related rights. But let's start first with copyright works. Copyright works, as you all know, probably are books, movies, TV series, photographies, musical works, works of architecture, works of fine art, paintings, choreographies, and works of applied art. What is the basic for work to be treated as work of copyright? It has to be original work. That has to be the work that is result of intellectual activity of certain person. That means it is an intellectual creation, not mechanical creation, but the result of some person's intellect. And it has to be from the field of literature, science, or from the artistic domain. The copyright work has to have individual character. And it is completely, no matter in which form, in which expression, of which type, of which value, and which was the purpose of that work. Meaning, everything which is original, which is a result of intellectual activity from the literary, scientific, and artistic domain can be protected as copyrighted work. So, who is the author? The author can only be natural person. The author cannot be a legal person because the authorship and protection of copyright basically comes from the individual creation, individual intellectual creation. So you must notice that we will talk about it later. It will be different when we talk who owns the copyright in someone's work, but authors, original right owner to the copyrighted work is always natural person. Of course, there are many situations. Most of the situations are that author is not only one. And in that sense, we differentiate compound works and co-authorships. What is compound work? Authors of compound work are authors who previously individually created their own works and then they joined those works for purpose of joint use. The important things when we talk about compound works is that each of the authors of compound work shall keep its own rights to his or her individual part of that compound work, and he can use that his own part completely individually and completely separately. The mutual relationship in compound works is always agreed by contracts between those authors. It can be, of course, two or more authors of compound work, but their mutual relationship should be regulated by contracts. If this is not the case, it will be treated that they have equal share in compound work. When we talk on the other side of co-authors, they created work jointly. They didn't created their own work and then connected with someone other's work, but they were created one work jointly. They have joint copyright in the work and their contributions cannot be used independently. Also, their mutual relationship shall be regulated by the contract, and if not, it will be treated that they have equal share in that co-author's work. Let's see some examples of the compound work and of co-author's work. Compound work is, for example, a book with illustrations. We have a writer of the book and we have illustrators of the book. Illustrations can be used as works of fine arts completely independently, and book can be printed without illustrations. So this means that each of the authors, each of the part shall keep its own copyright to its own part of the work, but if they use it jointly, it is compound work, and in that case, they will be authors of compound work. If we have music song, normally we have text of the music and we have text or lyrics. We have a small mistake here, and we have music. It can be also in some cases like opera that it is created jointly, but normally those parts, music and text, can be used separately, and this is then compound work. But in case of music songs, you will see it can be also co-authors work. We have also cases when two or more composers jointly compose the music. In that case, we cannot separate who wrote which part of the music. They will be treated as co-authors of the music. A very usual form of co-authorship is movie. You have screenwriters, you have directors of the photography. All those are authors, but none of them can use their part separately. The final product is movie. Movie consists of their participation, of their contribution, of their co-authorships of one single work, which is the movie. Now we are going to speak about who is the copyright owner. As you remember, we spoke that author is always natural person. But in that case, author is of course copyright owner. But in case of transfer right, some other person shall be owner of the copyright in the copyrighted works. Transferring of the rights is usually conducted with contracts, agreements, declarations, or some kind of written form. It is usual in most of the countries, therefore transfer of copyright, the written form is needed. But what I can say, it is always most secure if you have a written form, even where you are giving right to someone, or even if you want to use someone else's work. It is important that you know what are you giving or what are you obtaining, which is the period on which you are obtaining or giving the work and the rights. It is also the possibility that the copyright is inherited. As you will see later, author's rights last 70 years after the death of the author. That means that in that period, somebody is copyright owner to the author's works of the author who is not live anymore. but you will have to see if you intend to use someone's work, to whom shall you address? That is the copyright owner who owns the rights for the certain period of time, but is not the author. What is not copyright work? Not everything what is part of intellectual creation is copyright work. For example, ideas. Idea is intellectual creation, but ideas are not copyrighted. Copyright work must be materialized or expressed in any way. So you have to have something, or you must hear something, or you must see something in order that such thing can be protected by copyright. Ideas are not. Procedures and methods that falls under scientific field. It has some originality, but procedures, methods, and mathematical concepts are not protected by the copyright. That can be protected by some industrial property rights, know-how, for example, but not through copyright. Discoveries. Pure discoveries are not creations. Those are discoveries. And, for example, daily news. News that have only media information character and are not creatively developed are not protected as copyrighted works. Are oral works copyrighted works? Yes, even if those works are not fixed to something, those works can be heard. So they are expressed in some way. If they are heard, they can be recorded. So oral works, speeches are copyrighted works. Ideas for computer programs are not copyrighted works, but computer program as a result of idea shall be protected. News, as I told you before, they are not protected if they are purely a media information, but some publication content in form of original journalistic text is protected. For example, journalistic columns, investigative text, or something like that. But pure news, as something happens somewhere or something will happen somewhere, will come somewhere on that day, this is not copyrighted work. That is purely media information. Translations are also interesting stuff. If translations are translations of something which was already creative work, meaning that also the translations is creative, then it is protected. For example, translations of books, translations of comics, translations of audiovisual works, movies, TV series, everything can be protected. But no, the translations are not protected if those are purely technical translations. It depends on the point of creativity to decide whether something is protected by copyright or not. So, which type of rights do we have on copyrighted works? Basically, we divide the rights in moral rights and economic rights. What types of moral rights we have? It is first a recognition right. What does that mean? That means that on every work, whenever it is possible, the name of the author must be stated. It is the moral rights of the author to be mentioned when his work is used. The other important moral rights is right to respect the integrity of the work. That means that you cannot change someone's work because then you are breaching the integrity of that work. And if you are breaching the integrity of the work, you are breaching the moral right of the author because the author had some vision of how the work shall be presented. Any changes to that vision, meaning changes to that work, can be against the moral right of the respect of the integrity of the work. We have also the right of the author in respect to its honor and reputation. This is something that cannot be generally explained what it is, but because it depends on the author himself. Uh, someone's work cannot be used in a way that it can prejudice to the honor and reputation of the author. For example, you cannot use someone's music in, for example, explicit scenes movies, because maybe it is against of the honor and reputation of the author. In some cases, author can give you permission of such uses, but mostly it will be against the honor and the reputation. But what is important with that right, that it depends of the state of mind of each individual author. It is not the general rule, it depends on the relationship of the author to his own reputation and to the morality as such. Also, the moral rights of the author is right to revocation. Sometimes authors create, when they are young authors, some work that later on, I don't know, 10, 20 years after the creation, they are not satisfied anymore with that work. So the right of every author is to revoke that work from the exploitation in a way that no one can use it anymore. But in that case, it is not so simple, because in that case, if authors have signed some agreement for a certain long period of time with some persons, he will have probably to regulate the things with that person who obtained the right to use such works that author wants to revoke. And if that third person invested something in that work, in the exploitation of that work, they will also have to settle some monetary issues. The moral right of the author, first moral right of the author, is right to the first disclosure. No one, even someone, can see the work if that work has not already been publicated or shown in public in any way. It is the author who is authorized to decide when, how, in which place, at which time his work will be firstly disclosed. All those are moral rights and have to do something with personal things of the author. The other part of rights are economic rights. Economic rights are, for example, rights to reproduction, which means right to make copies of the work. Rights of distribution, that also means the rental of the work, lending of the work, the selling of the work. That means the rights to put the work into circulation. One of the most important economic rights is rights of the communication to the public. There are many, many different types types of communication to the public of the work. It can be stage presentation, broadcasting, using on the internet. It is the way of distribution of the work in a way that public can see that work and use that work. This is no strict definition, but it is any way when the work become seeable and perceivable by the public. Also, the economic rights to someone's works is rights to alteration, adaptation, changes to the works. All those are economic rights of the authors. As you can see, the moral rights, because they are connected with the person, those moral rights can only belong to natural persons. Those moral rights represent emotional value which you connect to the work. Usually, those rights are not transferable because they have personal touch, personal connection of the author with his or her work. On the other side, economic rights are those part of rights connected with the work that can be transferred, that can belong to author, but also to any other person, meaning natural or legal, whether the rights are inherited, whether the rights are transferred by contract. Those rights represent economic value, not emotional value, but purely economic value of the work. But when you are signing the contracts, if you are creator, you will firstly and mostly think about economic rights, and part of those economic types of those economic rights that you will transfer, but you mustn't forget to that part of the moral rights. On the other side, if you are obtaining someone's work for usage because you want to use someone's work, you have to obey author's moral rights, but you will usually obtain only economic rights. You mustn't act against someone's moral rights unless you are explicitly allowed to. Meaning, one of the most usual cases is that right to recognition. Sometimes it is usual that you are transferring the economic rights, meaning rights of the usage of your work to someone, but it is not usual that during that usage, your name will be stated on the work. For example, if someone's song is broadcasting on the radio or television, but mostly on radio, it is not usual that it can be uh, 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 written or heard whose work is that. And it is not normal in that course of using. So in that case, moral rights will be given up. You will give the right to someone that use your work without need to respect your right to recognition. That is also when the song is shortened on the radio. It is not, usually it will be a breach of moral rights, but if it is usual in that business that the work is used in some other manner, meaning without the name or a little bit shorter, it will not be breach of the moral rights of the author. You always have to see and to take care about the normal conditions of usage, normal way of how some copyrighted works are used. When we talk about economic rights, we have two different types of rights. Of course, it sounds complicated, but therefore I encourage you once again, if you want to ask something, just ask, just raise your hands, just write your question, and we can go back to the things that are not completely clear. So we are now in economic rights. Those can be exclusive rights or remuneration rights. What is the main difference? When you have exclusive rights, this is the right of the author to authorize or forbid the usage of copyrighted work. Meaning the, the control is in hands of the author. Of course, that right to authorize or forbid the usage will come with the conditions of that usage, meaning where, when, for which price that copyrighted works can be used. On the other hand, when we have remuneration rights, that is not the right of the author to control the work. The work, in that case, when you are entitled to remuneration right, the author only have the right to be remunerated, meaning to receive some fee, some royalty for the usage, but the author doesn't have possibility to authorize or forbid the usage. Usually those remuneration rights are regulated by law, so if something is not remuneration right, it will always be exclusive right. And you will always have the possibility of control unless some right is treated as remuneration right. I have to emphasize that whether something is exclusive right or something is remuneration right depends on law, and it can be different in each country. Something that is in one country exclusive right, in some other country is remuneration right. For example, also I will tell about music. In some countries, some European countries, when some music that is recorded on phonograms is broadcasted on the radio and television, in most countries, the authors and performers will have remuneration right when this is broadcasted. But in Croatia, this right is also exclusive right. So the authors and performers have the right to forbid or to authorize the usage. But it is not so complex because usually this is done not individually by each individual author, but through so-called collecting societies. We will speak a little bit later about collecting societies. So the most important thing is that you will always have to see in your law what right belongs to you as exclusive right, meaning which right gives you the right to forbid the usage or to authorize the usage, and which right, according to your law in your country, gives you only right to receive the remuneration, but you don't have the possibility to forbid the usage of that right. For example, exclusive rights. When we have books, writers have exclusive rights to authorize the publication of the books. Also, the painters, illustrators have exclusive rights for incorporation of their illustrations in the books. Those are their exclusive rights, and they will regulate their rights the same way as the writer with the publisher. But once the book is out, once the book is published, pressed and published and into circulation, they will not have exclusive right anymore in respect to lending of those books or rental of those books. Rental and lending will normally be remuneration right for writers and illustrators, because no one can control how much is that book to whom rented or lended through the libraries. So they will use their exclusive rights to transfer the right to publisher and give the publisher the right to press the book with illustrations. But furthermore, they will receive only the fee when such books are rented or lended, and they will not have the possibility to forbid such renting or lending of the books. Also, that can be different in various countries. I must always, I must tell you that there is no unique copyright law in the world. Even in the Europe, there is no unique solutions of the copyright. Each country has specificities. In Europe, we have uh, certain uh, basic principles that are stated in European directives, but directives are only minimums. So that what is written in European directives represents minimums of protection, minimums of regulations, or possibilities of different regulations. So every of the European Union countries have possibilities to implement the directives in a way that is best for their territory, or which is in accordance with their tradition, legal tradition. So it is not always and everywhere same. And that is something that you always have to keep in mind, because if you are giving the rights for certain territory, you will have to see what are your possibilities on that territory. If you are giving the rights for the worldwide usage, you will usually look at your rights according to your individual law in your individual country. Basic principles shall be pretty much the same, but there can be specificities in some different countries. It is especially when you have certain contracts between European Union countries and United States of America, or European Union and also United Kingdom. These are different legal standards. There are different legal tradition. uh, European Union is based on European continental law system, and United States and United Kingdom are much more on the common law system, meaning the precedents are much more important, not the written law. So the whole system is different. So the differences can also appear in the copyright regulations. What is also important, and it is especially in the works of fine art, in cases of paintings, in cases of photographies, in cases of sculptures, what is important? The owner of the object of copyright is not usually copyright owner. Copyright to the work is different from the ownership of the object of copyright. For example, you draw a picture, you make a sculpture, you make a photography, and you sell it to someone. What is with the new owner? Can that new owner of that object, which is normally intended for sale, is he entitled to do whatever he wants with that object? No. Usually, when you sell to somebody your work, you were selling the object for its own personal usage, for the personal usage of that buyer. But you didn't normally sell him the right that he makes, for example, postcards, or that he use it and put the photo of that object in the book. No, those are kind of usage that are protected by the copyright, and that kind of usage do not belong to the person who bought the object of copyright. It is the same with museums. Museums are owners of the objects, but are not the owners of copyright. Museums can, of course, that are some limitations of your copyright to the work. Museums can print posters in order to say, yes, we have the exhibition where these works shall be presented. So in that case, they can use the photo of the picture or photo of the sculpture, but they cannot, for example, create bookmarks or create anything for selling purposes. This is something that they can do only if they agreed upon that with the copyright owner, whether it is author or author's heirs. But it is, of course, always the possibility that with the selling of the object of the copyright, the rights are also sold. That means that someone who wants your picture wants also the rights that are connected with the picture. Of course, if you are selling the rights together with the object, the price will not be the same. The price of that object will be higher because you are transferring also the economic rights, which will normally give you additional income. If you are selling the rights, you have to calculate that potential income that you are losing. So we now covered in some way authors of the works. But if you recall, I said that when we are talking about copyright, we are not talking only about authors, but we are talking about the neighboring rights. Before I continue with the neighboring rights or related rights, please tell me, is there any questions? We can make a short break for authors' rights and ask and give you the answers if you want to ask something. No questions? So, okay.
Christina,
Yes.
I think, can ask the questions I mentioned before, perhaps. I think they're connected with what you've said so far.
Collective work?
No, I think my questions are connected, can connect with what you've said so far. So,
okay.
Okay, the first one is, let's say that an Erasmus Plus project has as a deliverable the preparation of a theatrical script, okay, a play. How do we protect these scripts authors' rights? Do they have to do a certain procedure that can protect their rights over this script, or do they have to do something specific in the country of origin of the author to protect? Because it's this process. And I have another question, but I guess you can answer this one first and then proceed with the other one.
Mm-hmm. So it is something that will be explained a little bit later.
Oh, okay.
Yes, regarding the protection of the work, I wanted to present you the whole thing, so I will tell you about the protection, because sometimes in some judicial system, works must be registered, but normally in Europe, the works doesn't have to be registered in order to be protected. But we will discuss that a little bit later.
Okay, great. So I will ask the second question again later. And there is also another question in the chat, which I don't know if it is to be answered later when you talk about the
Let me see.
protection. Yes, you can see it's from Sevdan.
How to ensure my author's rights when I publish art on internet? You have to declare your authorship, and you have normally you don't have, because everybody should know that cannot use the work without authorization, but it is always good to put well, I don't know which type of works are we talking about. Sometimes you have like water stamps in case of photographies, which is which is put over photographies in order that that photography cannot be used because there is a water stamp on it. But in other things, you should write just simple sentence that the word cannot be used in any way without the authorization of the author. So it is something that should refrain anybody of usage without authorization. It is not always possible to protect it 100%, but if you write down with your artwork that it cannot be used without the permission in any way, it should be enough, at least for further court or judicial procedure if necessary. You're welcome. So, any other questions in respect to copyright or?
Sevda just raised her hand.
Yes, hello. I have another question, if I can.
Yes, please.
Yes, I'm not clear with one point. If we use someone's art for educational purposes, is it possible? Let's say if we are publishing educational book or textbook, or making a PowerPoint presentation for a training, can we use art in this way? Is it legal?
Well, this is something that I slightly mentioned when I was talking about remuneration right and certain limitations of the copyright. We will have the part which is dedicated to usage of others' rights. Usually and normally in most of the European countries, usage for educational purposes is allowed. It can be different whether it has to be paid or not. But usually, if you are using that in schools, in educational institution, you will not have to pay, but it depends on individual law, because this using for educational purposes is one of the possibility that exists in European law, but every and each country was independent to implement that limitation, so-called limitation of right in their own copyright law or not. So, for example, in Croatia, you can use it for educational purposes. You will have to see in the part of the copyright law in your country, and the part which is usually called limitation of copyright. I don't know, did I answer enough?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
You will just have to look at the chapter which covers limitations of copyright.
There is another question in
Yes,
the chat.
I see. Haha. This is not normally allowed. It can be, so the question was, what if I use a photo or part of the photo to create a painting and so a new artwork? Of course, you will find so-called royalty-free works on the internet, or works that are published under Creative Commons licenses on the internet that can be used under some conditions. But normally you cannot use someone's work and incorporate it in your work and create a new work without authorizations of the author of original work. This is the basic answer, but of course there are of you have to see it on the case by case basis, because if it is copyright clear free, or if it is the work where the rights have been expired, for example, you will use the work from Leonardo da Vinci, that is allowed. But the works on which the rights are still existing cannot be used in some other's works without authorization of the right owner. Any other question? So we can answer if you come to that you want to ask something. We can go further now, and then we can, after the presentation, discuss anything else, or we can return also to author's rights. So let's go to related or neighboring rights. Primarily, those are performers. Who are performers? Performers can be actors in theater, in movies, on TV. Those are also dancers, musicians, singers. All those persons are owners of related rights of performers. Performers, the same as authors, initially can only be natural persons. Even if we are talking about choir as a performer, or music band of orchestra, this is something that is right owner who is consisting of natural persons, because those are persons who perform literary or artistic works or expressions of folklore. And they have rights not to the work, but to their performances of work. Meaning the performance is in that case, something that is protected. That performance can be fixed or non-fixed. When I say fixed, I mean recorded, or also performance on the stage is protected. It is protected against recording. You cannot record someone who is on stage and fix his performance unless the performer gave you the permission to do that. Performers have also moral and economic rights. And everything that I said to moral and economic rights in respect of the authors is more or less the same also to performers. Moral rights, rights to be recognized as a performer, rights that your performance is not adapted, used in a manner that is not in line with your moral and reputation. Everything what we said about authors is the same also to performers. Economic right also. That can be reproduction right, communication to the public right, presentation right, and also are divided to exclusive right, meaning performers are entitled to adapt, to allow or prohibit the usage of performance, but also can be remuneration right, meaning performances can be used, but someone will have to pay a royalty or fee for such a usage. The second and other neighboring rights are not anymore the rights of natural person, but more usual, those are rights of legal person. Mostly when we talk of producers, it can be of course natural person, but mostly producers are legal persons. Those are persons that take initiative, raise funds, and are responsible for the first fixations of the work. Of course, especially in music, you have situations of do it by yourself artists. Those artists are authors and performers and producers in the same person. They have all three types of rights. But if you are generally look at the music or film industry, you will have certain legal entity like a production house or discographic house that owns producers' rights. So we have audiovisual producers to the videogram. What is videogram? Videogram is every fixation of the visual pictures together or without the sound. And you have phonogram producers, they have rights to the phonogram. It is purely oral fixation without video part. So videograms are movies, TV series, every audiovisual product, commercials, everything is videogram. Phonogram is everything what is only recorded, only audio recorded. What is the most important thing when we are talking about the producers? They don't have moral rights. They don't have moral rights because they don't have personal connections with the work or with the performers. They are here for organizational and financial purposes. Of course that you have music producers and audiovisual producers which have creative contribution. But when we are talking about copyright producers' rights, copyright audiovisual producers' rights or copyright phonogram producers' rights, this is not the same. This is something different than usually when we are talking about music producers who are creating the sound, or audiovisual producers who are the creative part of the movie making process. It is always important to distinguish those two parts. When we are talking in copyright about producers, we are talking about persons who owns producers' rights and normally don't have anything with creativity. So they own only economic rights as their own rights, initially own rights, but also they can own economic rights of authors and performers if authors and performers transferred their economic rights. So you will see producers will be the person that have their own rights, but also others' rights that are needed. It is not because they want those rights, but if you are looking at this example of movie picture, producer is here normally production company, who without whom the movie will not be made. They organize everything. They organize director, they organize screenwriter, they organize actors. They do everything in order to finish the movie. But as those persons who were participating in the creation of that movie have their own rights, audiovisual producer could not sell that movie unless he has obtained the rights from all those persons that participated in creation. It will be impossible to distribute the movie if every author and every performer will keep their own right and regulate the usage of that right. It is impossible, not because it is not practical, but it is definitely impossible. So the rights, if you want to make a movie and distribute that movie, the rights have to be on one place, and it is a place of audiovisual producer. So that's why we said why we say that producers have their own rights, but also the transferred rights. The next are broadcasting organizations. It is nothing that is so important to artists because broadcasting organizations have their own rights only to the signal of their programs. But if you negotiate with the broadcasting organizations on something, you will probably negotiate for usage of your work and not in respect of their signal. But you will transfer to broadcasting organization right to, I don't know, to broadcast the concert where you were, or the broadcast the movie you made in their programs. They will not become the owners of your work, but they will have the right to their signal and right to use your work. But their rights are their rights, and those are rights to signal and don't have anything to do with your rights. Another rights, this is a similar rights as the producers' rights. We were telling about producers of audiovisual work and producers of audio work. Publishers, we can call them producers of written work, meaning they are those who publish the works, but they usually don't invest much, they don't have so much organizational effort. So they will have only transferred rights from the writers or illustrators or similar to distribute and press the book, but they will have their own rights only to first publications of previously unpublished work where the rights have been expired. So it is also nothing important to you that, so if you're a writer, you will always sign the contract with the publisher, but the publisher will not have its own rights to that book, but only yours transfer rights. There are also the press publications, press publishers, and it is a new right since 2019 directive, which was brought 2019, especially regarding the internet usage. And those press publications rights to publishers are mostly related to digital use. Now, what about the protection? Here we will answer the something that I was asked. In Europe, there is no need for registration of the copyright work. Protection of the copyright work starts with creation of that work. But you must notice that you should be able to prove that you created the work and the moment of creation. You should be able to prove that only if someone someone use your work or someone infringe your right, then you will have to prove that you are the author, and you will have to prove when you created, because otherwise the person who infringed your rights can claim that they are the author. So you'll always have when you work in digital media sector, it is simple. It is much more simple because you have different tools that you can find on the internet where you can like fix the date of creation. But if you are writing a book, if you are drawing a picture, there are different ways how you can secure the proof of moment of creation, or at least the moment before you firstly published your creation. One of the simple, really simple things is if you write a work or if you draw a picture, put it on the CD or put it in the envelope. Send it via register mail to your address. If you are sending with the register mail, you will have the proof when it was sent. And when you receive your envelope, don't open it, just have it, and you will have the proof with the stamp, post stamp, with the proof when it was sent. You can also send it to the lawyer. You can send it to you can put it on the public notary. But that's the way that you could prove the date before it was published, meaning you were the only one who could access to that work on that date, which would mean that you created it. It is nothing that is written in the law, but it is something like a tips and tricks how you can protect or prove that you created and when you created. So that because Europe gives you the right from the first moment of creation, but it is then harder to prove when it was created. But in the US, for example, yes.
Okay, it was me again. But that leads me to the second question. When it is, for example, a musical piece, okay, composition or a song, that it is published on YouTube, for example, or another similar platform like Spotify or something like this, or on a website, then how these compositions are protected, the rights to the composers and the musicians?
Okay, yeah. So the rights are protected as such. Usually composers, because in music sector, it is normally massive usage. It is not normally individual usage song by song, but it is massive usage through massive platforms, through internet, through Spotify, through broadcasters, through radio stations. Usually, and it is common practice in nearly all the countries in the world, there are collecting societies that cover musical authors. Collecting societies, you will see a little bit later, are the non-profit organizations that are collectively protecting musical authors. Musical authors usually register their work by their collecting society to whom they belong, which is normally on their territory. But the protection is not given by the registration in the collecting society. Protection is given by the fact that you composed that music or wrote that text. But the moment when you registered that song in the collecting society will also be the sign when was that created. Normally, as far as I know, musical authors register their works even before they recorded it. It is the common practice. Someone compose first, second, register their work in the composer society, collecting society, and then third, give it into the publication or record it. It is, but I against emphasize that there is no necessity for registration for protection, and the fact that some work is not registered in the collecting society doesn't mean that it is not protected. It is harder to obtain the protection, but it is protected by the law, not by the same act.
Thank you so much, Christina.
No problem. So in US, it was the necessity for registration for long period. It is changing slightly, but they didn't went to the system that there is no registration needed, but hopefully in next period they will also give the protection since the creation. Now it must be registered. It can also be done via online tools. It is by Library of Congress, and it is quite easy to find the way how you can register your work in the US Library of Congress with the internet tools. You don't have to send it there to the post, but you can do it online also, but with uploading your work there. And as we said, the protection begins with the creation. Let's see how long protection lasts. As I mentioned previously, protection for the authors lasts 70 years after the death of authors. When we are speaking, let's remember those compound works, the protection in compound work, if we are talking about work, will last as long as 70 years after the last authors died. Also, for co-authors' works, the calculation shall be the calculation shall begin since the death of the last surviving author. So it is no matter when you have more authors who died first, but who died last, if you have collective works. For performers, if you don't have fixed performance, but only performance, it will last 50 years. It is 50 years also in audiovisual fixations. And it lasts 50 years not from the death of performers, but from the performance or from the publication or communication to the public of that performance or fixation of the performance. If we are talking of phonograms and performers on the phonograms, meaning musicians, singers, their rights will last 70 years from publication. You will see this is because the different directives treated differently different types of performers. So if we are talking about musicians or performances of phonogram, this lasts 70 years from publication or fixation. If you are talking of any other performer, their rights last 50 years. Probably in some recent time that will change also, but it also depends of the EU regulation, and from EU then it usually goes further in the world. Also, it is different in the Europe than in the US. They have completely different treatment, and something that is already in public domain in Europe is not in public domain in US. So you will always have to see for each individual work if it is in public domain in the US or not. You won't be able to calculate this because their duration changes from time to time as they change the law, and it is so complex that I don't know it by myself. I always have to check to see the year of creation, to see which law applied to that moment. So sometimes something that is older shall be protected than something that is younger. It is really complex system. This is normal for European Union, for Europe, not only European Union. This is the same in Switzerland and also the countries that are not the members of EU. For producers, the same. Producers of phonogram, their years will last 70 years of publication, or in some cases 50, but not. It is also a complex matter. And producers of videogram rights will last 50 years from fixation of publication. Why is here by phonogram producer 70 years or 50 years? First, that was 50 years. And then there was additional period of 20 years, which was given to producers and to performers. But the people who were creating the laws were very aware that there are many, many words that are older than 50 years, performances and so on, but producers are not giving them into circulation, distribution, nor on the internet, so the performers could obtain some earning or royalty from them. In that case, the legal writers said, no, if you are not using the phonogram, you producer, if you are not using that phonogram anymore after 50 years, your right will not be 70 years, but only 50. But the right of performer shall be 70 years. So these are some cases when the producers of phonogram and performers on the phonogram rights are not not having the same duration. Broadcasting organizations have rights that durate 50 years for first transmission, and publishers for press publications that is really new right, and it is brought only for purpose of protecting the investment into information. So those rights last only 2 years because the character of information is that is the information which is protected because of the actual moment it is important for. But for written publications, meaning or other publishers, not only press publishers, it is the 25 years from the first publications. So what I mentioned before, I will also emphasize once again. This is the different durations of the rights throughout the world. And that's the problem with public domain. You will never know when something becomes the work in public domain, which means that it's freely to be used, and where it is still protected. Now we have the question regarding usage of others' rights. What is general rule for everyone who creates something? Every creator has the right to receive appropriate and proportionate remuneration for every usage of the work. And now you always can discuss what is adequate and what is proportionate. Well, basically, it is the price which is usual for certain type of usage, for certain type of work and certain type of usage. Of course, if it is a well-known artist, the adequate remuneration will be something different than it is new artist. Also, there is some tool for artists which is called bestseller clause. It is something that is given to all artists and means if originally agreed price, meaning price that is in contract, is not adequate to the later financial success of the usage of the work, author and or performer can ask for the adequate contract changes. Meaning, you are a young artist and you sign a contract with a discographic producer, record producer, which entitles you to flat rate, which is not high, or entitles you to 2 or 3% of the income. And your work, your song becomes the great success and earns enormous money or big money, not enormous, not necessary that is enormous. In that case, you are entitled to ask for an adaptation of the initially agreed price. It is slightly different if we are talking about work for hire and buyout contracts. In buyout contracts, you basically transfer all the rights, or in work for hire, those are similar contracts. You make work for someone. That person pays you, and you agreed on the price which will cover the work and the rights. And in that case, it is questionable whether bestseller clause can be applied. But it must be clear then in that cases was buyout contracts or work for hire contracts in place. This is, as I say, general rule about appropriate and proportionate remuneration, but in some countries it can be also written in the law in which cases can one flat payment be allowed and in which not. In European directive, it is written then the buyout contracts should not be the rule, but also the price in buyout contract can be treated as adequate and proportionate. So it is also something that shall be treated on a case-by-case basis. When we are talking about usage of others' rights, there are certain terms that I want to tell you. Limitation of rights. We had already the question, what if I use the work for educational purposes? This usage will usually be covered with this system of limitation of rights. You can use the rights, someone other's rights, when there are no any more rights. You can use someone's work when the work was pulled in public domain. You can use also if works are published under Creative Commons licenses. You can use others' rights if those rights are regulated by collective management organizations, also it was mentioned. And you can use others' rights if you make a contract with the owner of that right. When we talk about limitation of rights, we said that protected subject matters can be used without authorizations but with payment, or without authorizations and without payment. Those are specific cases. Everything that is in that field of limitation of rights will fall under three-step test. Those must be cases that are expressly described in law, for example, educational purposes. That must not conflict with regular use of the work. So if you give for educational purposes some example showing the work, it will not conflict with the fact that that work will be otherwise bought and something like that. It will not harm the legitimate interests of right holders. Usually those are not commercial purposes, but all those three conditions must be fulfilled. And it is not like in the United States, what is fair use, that is doctrine that is decided purely on case-by-case basis. In Europe, you will have to pass three-step test to see if the usage falls and is described in this, if this exists in law. So meaning also the question, if you use someone part of the work and incorporate it in your work, and that part is still protected, it is not the case that is expressly described in law. It cannot be. The only thing that is similar to that is, for example, parody and pastiche, but also have to be decided according to specific usage. In parody, you can use someone else's work, but it has to be the purpose that describes the reason and ratio with usage, and not purely the creation of new work. Public domain, as we said, public domains, those are works where the duration of right has expired. It is not the same throughout the world. Sometimes if you have music work, maybe the work as such will be in public domain, but the performer, the fixation of performance is still protected. Meaning, if some orchestra now fix Ninth Symphony of Beethoven, you will not have, of course, to clear the right of the Beethoven, but you will have to regulate the right of that orchestra and that producer of the phonogram. So the part will be in public domain and part will not be in public domain. But when works are in public domain, they can be normally freely used, but of course you have to comply with basic moral rights, because sometimes the heirs can enforce moral rights if the usage is against morality on behalf of their presenters, meaning authors. That is something, but it is those are more basic moral rights, not general rule, and not always will that be enforced. If something is published under Creative Commons, it normally can be used, but as Creative Commons is set of licenses which have different regulations, each of those licenses have different regulations, you can use that work that is published under CC license only in accordance with the license under which it was published. Probably most of you have faced already a Creative Commons system. Sometimes it is only needed that you write a name of the author and you can do with the work whatever you want. But sometimes it must be very strict usage, non-commercial, with writing of authors and with usage that you can distribute it only under the same license. So you have the terms that are from basic terms to very strict rules, and you have always to see under which of the license the work that you want to use is published. Also, if you want to give the usage of your work under the CC license, you will have to choose under which of these license you can give, you want to give your work. Sorry, this is double, this 2 times the same slide. Now we have collective management. It is the normal when there is a massive usage of some works. It is a normal when you have music, when you have movies on TVs, but not for the producers, but for the authors and performers. Collective management organizations are are organizations that are based on non-profit basis. They are owned by the members, meaning the authors and performers or producers. Every right holder can choose to which collective management organizations it shall belong, for which territory, for which type of work, but he cannot choose specific work. it can choose type of work of type of usage. That is some regulation which enables collective management organizations to be efficient. So it is usual in music, in video, in digital press, in remuneration rights. So whenever you have those limitations of copyright, when you are entitled to use the work without authorization, but with payment of certain fees, usually those fees will be managed through collective management organizations. Some of the rights must go through mandatory collective management because it is the only possible way for the users and for the right owners. But some rights can go through collective management organization. This is so-called extended collective management, but every right owner can opt out from collective management of certain rights and say, no, these rights I would like to manage individually. That cannot do for those rights where there is a mandatory collective management. What is important that the prices that are paid to collective management organizations are equal, all right holders are treated equally, and fees are tariffs. You cannot give your work to collective management organizations and decide about the price. That is established by the tariffs of such collective management organization. And last, this is the individual management. That is when there is no mandatory collective management. Of course, every right owner is entitled to regulate the usage of its own rights. It will always and normally be by the contract. In that contract, it should be regulated. What do you give them or what somebody gives you? Meaning which types of usage you will be allowed to do, for which period, which are the conditions, which is the price, and every other condition for usage. Individual management can apply between right holder and final user, meaning, for example, you have a theatrical work and you will sign the contract with theater company in order that they are allowed to put your work on the stage. The other type is also between right holder and producers. That is classic directors, audiovisual producers contract or record company musician contract. So all those are contracts that are based on individual management system. It covers all rights that are not in collective management. They are not free to work and are signed normally and are suggested to be signed normally because by that contract you regulate all the conditions, and if someone use the work contrary to those conditions, it will be in breach of your rights. That's why most of the countries ask for the written contracts, not oral contracts, because of the complexity of conditions that are normal to be in such contracts. That's why the rights are usually transferred with written contracts, or are best to be transferred by written contracts. And what if the rights have been breached? There are, of course, different types of procedures. Civil procedures, it is usually used if someone without authorization used your rights and you want to obtain a fee for such unauthorized usage, you have criminal procedures. Those are usually against pirates, massive pirates. And you will have also some administrative procedures in protection of rights, sometimes in customs procedures and like that. So those protection of rights are also depending on the judicial system you belong to. Those are different in different countries, but also the basic principles in Europe are regulated with the directives, so most of the countries applied the same and similar rules, but you should also see which law will you use. For example, if your rights, that is maybe important to mention if we are talking about internet usage or internet rights that are being, I don't know, sorry, I'm a little bit tired. If your rights are just I'm missing the words. If somebody used your work over the internet, if you go against the person who breach your rights in the country where that person lives, you can ask the protection for the entire world. But if you can of course go to your domicile country, but or any other territory, but then you can ask for the fee only for that belongs to that territory. So the only way that you can cover the fee, the damage for the worldwide territory will be if you sue the person at the territory where that person lives. So I tried to explain a little bit. I'm not sure if I managed to do that, but we came to the end of my presentation. So if you have any questions, I'm here to answer. Thank you. Any questions?
So if there are any questions, you can either unmute yourselves or type the question in the chat section.
Thank you for your replies that it was interesting. I hope I wasn't bored or I wasn't boring so much. I know that when you are talking about the law, it can be boring, but there are some principles that are really needed for you to know, basic principles. I tried to be as interesting as it is possible.
Okay, so if there aren't any questions, I guess we can proceed with closing remarks. So first and foremost, I would also like to thank you very much, Mrs. Christina, for today's interesting session, and the partners from Open Media in Croatia, of course. Also, I would please ask you to take a few minutes to fill out the evaluation form. I just pasted in the chat. I pasted the link. It won't take you many minutes. So if you could please take a few minutes to fill it out. Of course, the attendance list I sent you earlier. but even if you don't seem to have access right now, or you're in a rush and you can't fill them out right now, I will also send them to you via email tomorrow. So if there aren't any remarks from Mrs. Christina or from you, any questions, I would like to please open your cameras in order to take a photo for the promotion of today's session. So please open your cameras, everyone who's still here and wants to. Okay, I'm waiting. Okay, so I guess this is okay, some more. Okay, let me just, okay, stand still. Right, let me see. Great. Okay, the photo is great too. So thank you all for joining today's session. Thank you very much. And stay tuned and updated for the rest of the Open Art Studios webinars. Thank you again, Mrs. Martina, Mrs. Christina, for today's session. And have a nice evening, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. Bye.
Bye, everyone.